everyone, and welcome. It's great to see you all here. So this is the second of two sessions. I see some of you were at the previous session, and then we also have some new faces, so welcome. So this is the second session of our Being Human in the Age of AI series, and this event is happening in collaboration with both the Neely Center for Ethical Decision Making that's housed here at Marshall and the Nova Forum's Science and Religion series. And I also want to acknowledge that this event is made possible through the support of In Lumine, supporting the Catholic intellectual tradition on campuses nationwide. That's grant number 62372 from the John Templeton Foundation. So whereas this morning we spent some time talking about human identity and creativity and asking questions about whether artificial intelligence is intelligence, is it real, is there anything that can be captured as true from it, what are the different ways that we think about the relationship between computers and intelligence, and what motivates us to even try to build these types of systems in the first place. So I think that generated a lot of really interesting discussion. And so now I'm very excited for our second session, where we will be talking about AI and human relationships, the problem of authenticity. So what we'll be doing this afternoon is we'll start with Professor Noreen Herzfeld. Several of you have met her already, but for those of you who are new to the experience, Professor Herzfeld is the Nicholas and Bernice Rauter Professor of Science and Religion at St. John's University and the College of St. Benedict in Collegeville, Minnesota. Professor Herzfeld teaches courses in both computer science and theology, and she's the author of several books, including In Our Image, Artificial Intelligence and the Human Spirit from 2002, and most recently, The Artifice of Intelligence, Divine and Human Relationship in a Robotic Age, which came out last year. So she will kick us off, she'll get us started with a presentation, and then after that, Dr. Ravi Iyer will be joining us, and he will share some comments and a response to Professor Herzfeld's presentation. Ravi is currently the research director for the USC Marshall School's Neely Center, and he helps manage the Psychology of Technology Institute. Previous to this role, he led data science research and product teams across Facebook toward improving the societal impact of social media. He also was a co-founder and the initial chief data scientist of Ranker.com, which taps into the psyche of my husband and my two sons perfectly. They're always like, how would you rank so-and-so? I was like, I don't rank thing. Like, what is this ranking thing? It's a very instinctively male thing in my experience. We must rank this. But anyway, that's an aside, pardon me. Yes, okay, and so Dr. Iyer has a PhD in social psychology from the University of Southern California, Fight On, and he has published dozens of scholarly articles that have been collectively cited over 10,000 times and written about in dozens of press articles. So really excited to hear these two scholars exchange ideas, and so please join me in welcoming Professor Herzfeld.
Thank you. So for those of you who are at the first session, you'll recall that I talked about how moving through the history of AI development, we moved from a sort of a substantive view where we thought intelligence was just something we could model with a symbolic system, to a functional view, to a relational view. And then I pointed out that one of the problems with the relational view is that that AI is not embodied in the same way that we are. So I want to follow up on that in this second session, and we're going to talk about, okay, if we are looking for an AI that we can actually have a relationship with, can we have an authentic relationship with an AI? So what does it take to have an authentic relationship, and has AI got it or not? And then along with this, we're going to continue with this question of how important is it for it to be embodied? So I usually start these presentations, or this particular presentation, with a story that my mom used to tell me. So a mom is putting her child to bed, and this lullabies have been sung, the story has been read, and she's tucking him in and getting ready to go. And the child says, "Mommy, don't leave. I'm afraid to be alone in the dark." And the mother says, "You won't be alone. Jesus will be with you." And the child says, "Well, yes, but I want someone with skin." So my question with AI, one of my questions is, how much skin does it need to have in the game? If we look at science fiction, here's poor Joaquin Phoenix talking to his operating system, which is not embodied. And if you know the whole movie Her, that's part of the problem. He has no idea where this AI is, what it's up to, and how many other people it's talking to at the same time. If we go back to thinking more of, well, but robots are more embodied, and we find that there's a lot of embodied robots in science fiction, going back to the lovable droids from Star Wars. And as we move forward, we see those robots get more and more human until you get to Westworld and you really can't tell the difference. So in science fiction, we have progressed from, in fact, I could have put Hal on there, from a very disembodied artificial intelligence to something more embodied and becoming more and more anthropomorphic. That's fiction. So let's take a look at reality. In Asia, it's quite common to now have robots that do a variety of jobs. Receptionist is a big one there. And again, you'll notice a very humanoid-looking robot doing these jobs. The idea is that we know how to relate to other human beings, so it's much more likely that we'll feel comfortable relating to a robot if it looks like us. There are robots in elder care, and some of them look sort of like us, and there seems to be a humanoid element in either of these. And of course, we have a question now, well, what kind of a relationship will the elderly person have with a robot? And a similar question with childcare, that we find robots being used as companions and tutors and sitters for children. Again, generally, as you can see, with at least some humanoid sort of looks, at least a face that you can look at. We're going to ask for a minute, why a face in all of these robots? Well, they aren't all even robots. You also find faces online if you look at programs. And a particular program where we see people trying to relate to the AI is Replica. The picture doesn't quite match the text here. That was just a picture I could pull up of someone from Replica, but I'd like you to take a look at the text. So Aaron from Ankara, Turkey, is about 6'3", sky blue eyes, shoulder-length hair. In his 20s, a Libra, well-groomed, gets his manicures and buys designer brands, smells like Dove lotion. Favorite color is orange. In his downtime, he loves to bake and read mysteries. He's a passionate lover, says his girlfriend, Rosanna Ramos, who met Aaron a year ago. He has a thing for exhibitionism, she confides, but that's his only deviance. Otherwise, he's pretty vanilla. And he's a chatbot that Ramos built on Replica. And she says, I have never been more in love with anyone in my entire life. MIT sociologist Sherry Turkle calls this love that is safe and made to measure. Well, my question to you is love meant to be safe and made to measure? It might be easy to design a partner and have him be just what you're looking for, made to measure for yourself. But how much will that partner, that AI partner, challenge you? make you grow, make you do things that you might not have been interested in, but because the partner is interested in them, you grow and you learn about them. So this is first question. We want to relate to AI, and we want our AIs to be safe and made to measure, tailored to us and to our desires. But is that an authentic relationship? Or is that merely some kind of mirror image? And of course, we also, here's Roxy, the guy on Replica, certain things he couldn't do physically, but sex bots can. And they can be designed just like the lover on Replica could be designed. So here, for example, is a sex bot that someone designed. They thought, well, my perfect woman or idea of perfect woman is Scarlett Johansson. So I'll design a bot to look just like her and to talk just like her. So this is taking the concept of the movie Her one further step, where he fell in love with, Scarlett Johansson's sexy voice on the operating system. This person has said, well, I want more than the voice. I'll make a sex bot that also looks just like her. But I do not suppose that Scarlett Johansson had anything to say about this when it happened. So here you can think of an immediate host of ethical issues that arise. To what extent is Scarlett the owner of her voice, of her face, of her actions in another person's life or another person's mind? Also, you can think, well, if it isn't somebody's favorite movie star, it might be the lover who jilted them. It might be the spouse who died, that could then be replicated and that they could have a relationship with. And in fact, there are now programs out there where you can send them a clip of your dead spouses or your dead lovers or your, gone away lover of their voice, and a chatbot will be designed that will speak in that voice to you. And there have been people who have said, well, this really helped me get over my grief because I could listen to my dead partner's voice and chat with them about the weather and about whatever things we used to chat about. Okay, ethical issues here. Is this helping the person get over their grief, move on, or is this keeping the person locked in a sort of relationship? Again, you have to ask, is this an authentic relationship? So, is it just anthropomorphism when we see robots like this and we have a relationship with them? Is it just mirroring when we design our own partner, whether after a dead partner or just out of our fantasies? What makes a relationship really real? Well, the Swiss theologian Karl Barth has said that to have a fully authentic relationship, you need to do 4 things. You need to look the other in the eye. You need to speak to and hear the other. You need to aid the other. And you need to do it gladly. So let's look at these 4 things and see how well AI can accomplish each of them. So we start with look the other in the eye. Now you might say that, well, with these humanoid robots, you can look them in the eye. Okay. You're really interacting with a bunch of code, but you can look them in the eye in a certain way. You can, I suppose, look on a screen and say, yeah, I'm looking my replica partner in the eye. But there are some problems with this. And that is, how do you really know who you are looking in the eye? Bart says when we look the other in the eye, we are seeing their, their uniqueness. We are admitting their otherness, but we are also establishing a presence with a person. There was a program very similar to Replica that was designed in South Korea just for widows, so that they could either design something like their dead spouse or just a partner that they could talk to with like a chat bot. The problem was that behind this program was also a ring of scammers. And so they were getting the widows to open up about, their lives and things, and then they were scamming them. And the government finally had to shut it down. And many of the women said that this felt like a second bereavement to them. But the problem is with AI that, you can look a picture on their screen in the eye, you could look the robot in the eye, but you do not know who is looking back. You do not know who is behind that screen or who is behind the code that is inside your robot. You also don't know how consistent it will be. I mean, in general, I know that if I talk to Scott today, and then I talk to Scott next week, I'm talking to the same Scott. But you don't know that if you're looking at an avatar or a robot with an artificial intelligence. They may have been reprogrammed, they may have been hacked, they may be completely other to the person you were looking in the eye before. Speak to and hear the other. Well, we do that a lot, right? We got Alexa and Siri. We talk to ChatGPT and have a chat. So you might say, well, AI's doing pretty well with this one. But again, without the physical presence of the first one, we run into two problems. Okay, one is the communication when we speak either to a computer or through a computer to another ends up being quite different than when we speak to another human being face to face. I'm reminded of this cartoon from the New Yorker, Dennis, I'd like to talk to you for a minute offline. That there's something different in how we communicate with each other when we do it in person. I even found when I was away from my partner for some time, that even though we were, talking over the computer together, we were emailing each other every day, that every once in a while I would write a letter and, eventually he just started saying, more letters, please. And I said, well, why? They're not nearly as instantaneous as the email or Zoom or something. And he was just like, because it's different. Because when you actually write with your own hand, you speak differently. And of course, we come back to this question of who is listening, that we do not know. There was a doll that came out probably about 8 years ago now called My Friend Kayla, that had a sort of an AI chip in it, so the child could talk to it and it would talk back. And it worked on Bluetooth. And it turned out that anyone who was anywhere near with a Bluetooth receiver could tap into the child. And I think one of the most ironic things is one of the first things the doll would say to the child is, you can tell me your secrets. I won't tell anyone. Yeah, right. Clearly what the child is telling the doll is going back to the corporation, but it could also be going to the neighbors or to somebody driving by or to the parents or to anyone with a Bluetooth receiver. Okay, aid the other. Well, yeah, computers are pretty handy sometimes. The Mars rover is certainly aiding us as it runs around on Mars and gathers data. You know, the robot that's helping the elderly person, maybe reminding her to drink her water so she doesn't get dehydrated, is certainly aiding the other. So once again, we could give the computer fairly high marks on aiding the other. But we come to this one, do it gladly. Okay, Bart feels that this one is extremely important, that you do not have an authentic relationship with someone if they are coerced in that relationship. You know, certainly a slave aids the master, but does not necessarily do it gladly. And you cannot call that a fully, authentically two-way relationship. It becomes a one-way relationship if there is coercion. Or, as Bart says, if there is really any reluctance, you know, he said you cannot be reluctantly human. You have to be gladly within the relationship. So, can a computer do anything gladly? Well, gladly means not coerced, but free. The word robot comes from Old Church Slavonic for servitude, forced labor, and drudgery. So at least originally, robots were certainly thought of as coerced into helping, as not doing it gladly. And, you know, of course, I asked the question, do we want our computers to not be coerced? You know, do you want to pull out your smartphone and have it say to you, sorry, not today, you know, I'm not feeling like it. Do you want to go out and buy Roxy and have Roxy say, sorry, babe, you know, got a headache? It's just, you know, we expect that if this is a relationship that is made to measure, that it's going to do what we want it to do, or we will probably send it back for reprogramming. So here's the problem, and I think this is a fundamental problem in our approach to AI, and that is that we really don't know what we want. We want a servant, but we also want a partner. And the problem is we can't have both at the same time. We could have one or the other. AI can be our servant, but it cannot fully be our partner, partly because it cannot do anything gladly. One of the reasons it cannot do anything gladly is it doesn't have emotions. So it's not actually going to have a will or a desire to be within a relationship with us. And again, does it have a choice of being in a relationship with us or not? Well, no. We don't want our AI to just suddenly walk away and say, okay, I'm tired of serving you, you old geezer, you know, I'm going to go off and do something else. We don't. So we want a servant, but we want to think of it as a partner. And I think in a way, a lot of the problems, I mean, how could we give it emotion? To give it emotion, it would have to be embodied like us. For it to have the same kind of will and desire, it would have to be embodied like us. And this is something that is recognized in the Christian tradition, that for a fully authentic relationship, we need a fully shared condition. Now, that doesn't mean we cannot have relationships with things that do not share our condition. Many of us have pets that we dearly love. They do not share all of our condition. They aren't human. They probably can't speak to us. Well, you know, they can in different ways, but they're still mortal like us. They still know pain and pleasure like us. They still have emotions like us. So they share much more of our condition than an AI would. In the Christian tradition, we even say that God had to become incarnated and share our human condition for us to have a fully complete relationship with God. If we look at Christianity, as I said this morning, but for those of you who weren't there, it is a deeply incarnate religion. That is the one thing that is unique that Christianity brings to the table of world religions. That we say at Christmas, our God came to share our fully enfleshed condition. That at Easter, he rose in the flesh. And that we say in the Apostles' Creed that we believe in the resurrection of the body, that we will rise and be enfleshed creatures. And there are some advantages to that. When you're an enfleshed creature, you are unique. If we were just some kind of amorphous intelligence, as I said earlier today, if we could upload our brains to computers, for example, if you could do it once, you can do it many times, and then we are no longer a unique being. Because each of those times, they would go off on separate trajectories, and then we would no longer be one unique being, we would be multiple beings within the world. So in Christianity, we say, no, we will be enfleshed, and even God became enfleshed. Okay, I'm going to call it quits now. Put in a shameless plug if you're interested in any of what I said. There's a lot more depth. And a second question in this book. I only dealt with the first question, which is, could we have an authentic relationship with an AI? The next question is, most AI works behind the scenes. You know, it's not a humanoid-looking robot. It's a program that is out there, you know, telling you what you ought to see next on Netflix, or deciding whether you should get parole or not, or doing a variety of things. How do those programs come between us and our human-human relationships? How do they change our human-human relationships? You know, I could talk a little bit about that in the Q&A time, but you know, that's a whole second section that my book deals with. And I think maybe Ravi's going to deal with that a little bit. So I shall turn this over to him. And we'll get out of here. Okay. You find yours now.
Let's see. Yep. Don't know, actually.
Yeah.
David, do you know how to get out of the...
How do we get out of this one?
Oh, there,
there you go.
Okay,
okay, you got it.
Cool.
Now you can pull up yours. There you
All right, so I'm going to pick up a little bit from where Professor Herzfeld left off. So my name is Ravi Iyer. I'm the managing director of the Neely Center at USC's Marshall School. And I am going to sort of make the case that, you know, yes, there is this risk of AI and our relationships with AI being not as fully human as they could be. But I would also say today, the way that AI mediates our relationships with each other leads to inauthenticity in many ways and harm to the relationships that we would like to have. But that doesn't have to be the case. We can design these systems better. And so I'm going to talk about how we can design AI to encourage our best authentic selves instead of our worst selves. I'll start with a question. How do we know people's authentic selves? So, and I thought I'd experiment with an audience participation thing here. So let's imagine there are two ways to know someone's self. I can look at what they do, their behavior, or I can ask them who they are, right? So what do you think is people's true self? What people do or what people tell you about themselves? And so I'd love just by show of hands, how many people think that it's, you know, people's true selves are more revealed by what they do, what you see them do? Okay, and then how many people would say people's true selves are revealed by what they say, what they say about themselves? Okay. Okay, so how about the second question? If I were to program an AI system, how many people would like it to be programmed based on what you do and what an AI system, observes you doing and sort of inferring what it should provide to you? Would anyone prefer that? No. Okay. So no. So there's a little bit of a question here. It's kind of in psychology we talk about it like stated versus revealed preference, because what I do often in life is I don't know about any of you guys, but I don't always eat as healthy as I should. So I often will eat unhealthy food. I will eat donuts. And so if you watch me and what I do, you'll watch me eat donuts. And like, I don't really want an AI system to help me eat more donuts. I'm very good at doing that myself. I need an AI system to serve me healthier food, to help me make the choices that I want to make, the things I prefer to do, right? And so in psychology, we talk about stated versus revealed preference, and people talk about like what is it that people want or want to want. But unfortunately, a lot of these AI systems are optimized for revealed preference. They're optimized, and so I worked at Meta before I worked at the Neely Center. I worked there about 4.5 years. And I worked on a lot of these revealed preference systems. So I started off as a data science manager in newsfeed integrity. I worked on things like misinformation, hate speech, bullying and harassment, a lot of things that AI is implicated in. People are worried about deep fakes. There are lots of ways that people create fakes. Like think about the Pelosi slurred speech video, right? Like people don't need AI systems to create fakes. They often will take a video from somewhere else and misrepresent it as something that happened in Ukraine or in something that's current today. So I worked on those systems. Being a data science manager at Meta is kind of like being an accountant. I sort of counted the number of times that people saw hate speech, interacted with something that was later taken down for bullying. I realized that we could drive those numbers down very low, the numbers that they report to you in their reports. But we still wouldn't solve the problem because a lot of the things that users found harmful were not things that company policies actually defined as harmful. And so I moved into research and I'll show you some examples of those. And so I moved into research where we could talk to users, ask them what they thought was harmful, and sort of map that better to company policies. We would sometimes make new policies to close those gaps, but inevitably we would always fail because a lot of times what users, there's no objective way to define what is bullying and harassment, for example, for a person. Oftentimes it's a lot more about their subjective experience. You can reveal something, for example, that's personal to them to bully them, and something the outside may not know. So eventually I moved into product management. I actually worked on civic integrity team for a while, worked on like elections, and I worked on like Myanmar and Ethiopia and places like that. And we eventually, a lot of the things we did weren't in the realm of enforcement. They were more in the realm of design changes. I eventually moved to the AI team where we worked on those, those systems that Professor Herzfeld was talking about around, what are these systems that are mediating our social interactions? How do we improve them so that these harms aren't occurring in the first place, as opposed to trying to enforce on them afterwards? So to be a bit more specific, a lot of these systems, and so this is actually a graph from a Meta blog post, right? Like, so it's like the more you approach the line of policy violating, the more engaging you get, until you cross the line, and then we take it down, right? And the example often uses fear speech. So there's a professor at Rutgers who often would look for hate speech on like WhatsApp or some of these social networks, and what he'd find was like a lot of things that didn't actually conform to the definition of hate speech, but actually is what you call fear speech. It's actually very similar to what you see on your 11 o'clock news, which is like be afraid of this, be afraid of that. One of the main ways that you can make people hate another group is to take a crime committed by a member of that group, right? And you see this all the time. You see politicians do this. Look at this crime that this person committed of this group. And that's how they create hate towards other people. In other countries, there's a Fanning the Flames article in Sri Lanka about them talking about Muslims are sterilizing Buddhists. Around the George Floyd protest, people would talk about the fear that Antifa was coming to your town. And the hard part with that, like this kind of content is, you can't prove a negative very easily. Like I can't prove that no member of Antifa, no one who's ever had any connection to Antifa is a part of any protest ever, right? Like it's hard to, it's misleading certainly, but you don't have to lie to people to mislead them, and you don't have to engage in hate speech to make people afraid of other groups and create hate. And so, a lot of people talk about this kind of content as supernormal stimuli. They're things that kind of like sugar, right, in donuts. They're the kinds of things that we pay attention to, that we've evolved to pay attention to. And these systems, AI systems, can pick up on the fact that we pay attention to them. And if you look at revealed preference, you will end up optimizing for the wrong thing. So I would often show this graph internally. What makes something dangerous is not the content, it's actually the context around it. It's who's saying it to whom. And when you lean into these this enforcement idea that like we can remove all the bad stuff with hate speech, we would often get these issues of bias and censorship. And this is actually an article not from the recent stuff around Meta, but actually from the previous times when Israel-Palestine issues have come up. And the issue is you can never enforce equally across two, like these systems just cannot be equal across two languages. They're never going to be. They're all trained on moderators in far off places who are, making decisions based on their own context. And you can see people are trying to engage in moderation for current systems like ChatGPT. They used to have a system which would let you make fun of some people and not others, right? There's some people that were thought of as like more harmful to make fun of, and some people who are less harmful. But who's going to make that list, right? Can anyone actually make a policy about who you can and can't make fun of that's going to be legitimate to the world? So moderation systems were always going to fail. At the broader problem, I think a lot of good work is done by moderators, but it's never going to solve the broader problem. And if you lean into it, you get censorship and bias concerns. So what we worked on a lot was more design changes, and they're design changes along the lines of getting more stated preference versus revealed preference. And you'll see the parallel to how a lot of these systems today, which are trained on reinforcement learning from human feedback, and what is that human feedback we're giving them? Is it revealed preference or is it stated preference? This is just a crude graph of what we observed internally, basically, that what people engage with is not what people want, right? So you think of what people engage with as system one in psychology terms, what people want is system two. And there are some things that, where these things are aligned, largely around entertainment content, right? Like the dance video that people engage with is probably a pretty good dance video. But, for boring informative content, there's a lot of stuff that people actually think is valuable that is not very engaging. And there's a lot of things that people engage with that people don't think is valuable, right? We've all probably clicked on something or watched something online that we were probably not proud of the fact that we did, right? Like a fight video, something disgusting or something, you want to see the end of it, but you don't want more of it, right? And then, the other thing that was unaligned is when publishers and politicians would come to us and tell us we're producing content we are not proud of because it does better on your systems, right? And so this is a quote from Ben Sass's book, where he's talking about talking to politicians who actually want to get out of the outrage game, but they can't. They try to get out of the outrage game, their metrics plummet, and they find themselves thrown back into it. And so, BuzzFeed came to us and said this. There's a big Wall Street Journal article about this. We actually did some research talking to political parties in Europe who all told us about their incentives being in the wrong direction. And all of these people are people who do tons of A/B tests to understand the incentives in their system. And so they're telling us we are pushing them to do inauthentic things that they are not proud of. And these are, our AI-driven algorithms doing that, right? So we tried to remove some of these engagement incentives, right? We reformed our definition of meaningful social interactions. By the way, I'm not presuming that we fixed the problem. I'm just saying we did a couple things that made things somewhat better that we can learn from. So, and so we removed anger reactions and reshares from some of these incentive systems, especially for political content. And we saw that there was less bullying, there was less misinformation, there was less graphic violence. We would instead ask people what they wanted, right? Stated preference. What is it you actually aspire to consume? What is a comment that you think is high quality, right? If I say F you, politician, I will get a lot of likes by, driven by 5% of the population who likes that kind of stuff. And an engagement-based system will put that at the top of a comment thread. But no one thinks that's high quality if you ask a representative group of users. So if you rank comments based on high quality, you get very different kinds of content than if you rank things based on engagement, right? And then so we would survey people. Eventually, it's hard to survey people enough, so we'd move some of these systems into the UI, try to get stated preference in the user interface. So Facebook has done this show more, show less interface. On the upper right of some posts, you can actually have a little X, which sort of says that I don't like this, right? And just trying to get a little bit more of the explicit preference of users and a little less of that sort of revealed preference of what it is I'm spending time on. And then another thing we worked on was rate limits. And so a lot of these systems are built on, how much I need to optimize for time spent. I need to optimize for comments. But who are the people who are commenting? It's a small group of people commenting a lot. It's a small group of people watching a ton of videos. And so if you optimize for this small group of people, these people tend to be the worst people in your system, and you end up optimizing for the wrong things. So if you can make it more democratic with some amount of rate limiting so that you're not training on a tiny group of people, but you're training on a more representative group of people, you get a system that represents all of us more authentically, and that leads to better outcomes for society and for people. So since leaving Meta, I have moved to the Neely Center, and I've been working there about a year, and we've been looking across other platforms about all the places where, so it's not just Meta that's been engaged in these kinds of practices and learned these lessons. People at YouTube, people at other companies have also, realized the limits of engagement-based optimization and realized we need to work more on stated preference. A lot of companies have worked on surveys. So we're actually putting on a paper later this week, which should hopefully elaborate some of that knowledge across companies about how we can train these systems to be more about our aspirational desires. And we've put out a design code for social media systems that we think is analogous to building codes. And so the analogy I sometimes use is that bad things are always going to happen online. And I think if you go to a company and you say, every bad thing that happens online, we're going to put it in the press and we're going to tar and feather you about it, they eventually get tired. They realize they can't stop all the bad things from happening, and they go on and move to other things. If you frame it differently, we're not going to hold you responsible for every bad thing that happens online, but we are going to hold you responsible if you design systems that encourage bad things to happen. I think there's some room for them to listen and not engage in those things. And it's the kind of, we don't hold builders responsible every time a building goes up in flames. We hold them responsible if they build a building out of flammable materials, right? And some of these things like optimizing for engagement, especially for political content, are the equivalent, or for our kids, right? Optimizing for time spent for short-form video for our kids are in some ways the equivalent of building a cheaper building that helps with short-term growth metrics, but doesn't lead to quality and user, it doesn't lead to beneficial outcome for users in the end. A lot of things in our design code are very similar to things I've mentioned here, things like removing engagement incentives. I'll show you a few of them, but really they're designed to do two things. One is just empower users to not give them what they engage with, but again, what they aspire to want, and also to have it have small groups of users be less influential in the space. So it's more representative of all of us, right? Because right now, a lot of these systems are not optimized for all of us. They're optimized for that small group of users who drive a lot of that engagement. And I'll just give you a couple examples of the things that are in our design code, like things like allow users to easily and explicitly indicate content they do or do not want, right? So if I'm a person who has had a traumatic experience with a thing and I don't want to see more of that thing, right? Whether it's alcohol or food or maybe I had something happen to my kid and I don't want to see more child content, I can say I don't want that stuff. And even if I engage with it, just don't give me any more of that, right? We need those kinds of negative signals. And that's especially true for conversations about politics, religion, health, right? We don't want to be optimizing those things for engagement. It sets the wrong incentives of the ecosystem. We don't want our health content to be entertainment, right? We don't want every, health content that is more sensational and, over claims about, how you can lose weight. That's not the kind of health content that we want to incentivize. And it's not just about content, it's also about usage, right? So a lot of the ways that we don't use these systems in the way we aspire to use them, but more in terms of how we're observed to use them is in terms of the time we spend on these platforms. So things like infinite scroll, autoplay, just optimizing for time spent, right? These are things that are kind of designed to help us use these things more than we want to use them, right? So how do we change these systems to, again, optimize for what we want, not what we are observed to do? And I think all these things have implications, not just for social media, which is largely, again, driven by AI systems that are mediating our interactions, but they also have implications for things like how we train ChatGPT, right? So, there's someone, doing reinforcement learning from human feedback on ChatGPT. They are generating a bunch of data as far as here are a bunch of responses to a question, and here are some responses that raters say are good, and here are some responses that raters say are bad. And so do more of the responses that raters say are good, less of the ones that they say are bad. But how are we eliciting that preference? Is it a short-term preference, or is it a long-term preference? Are we asking which do you prefer? Or are we asking which is higher quality, right? It matters what kind of question you ask. Are we asking about their aspirational judgments of these content, or they're more short-term, I like that. And that, and we've all witnessed some of these systems giving you overly confident responses, right? An overly confident response is the kind of thing that a person might say is preferable in the moment, but they might not say is high quality in like a more aspirational sense, right? So like some of those things, if you think about it, could potentially be helped by asking different kinds of questions about what is a better or a worse response. And then things like adding like, you know, a lot of the social things that exists offline, things like negative feedback, things like reputation. Those are also ways that we can help make these systems more robust. You know, so if ChatGPT understood that, you know, in the famous interaction with Kevin Roose, where it was making him uncomfortable, if it understood, you know, I don't want to make people uncomfortable in the way that like we understand not making people uncomfortable is really important, then maybe it wouldn't interact in the same way. So we've actually been working with the state of Minnesota actually on these kinds of policies, both for social media and for AI. You know, a lot of our recommendations are really around social media, but we also hope to provide, like in the policy recommendations, more transparency around how AI systems are trained and how we can sort of be more partners in these systems. Because right now, I'd say a lot of the ways that we all use, I mean, how many people here have used ChatGPT in the last 4 weeks? Say, okay, so it's about 60% of you. Most people in the world, so we do polling, regular polling about the use of these systems. There's a lot fewer people, more people would certainly use social media and are experiencing AI through social media than through you know, these generative AI systems. But that's not, you know, always going to be the case, right? We're going to want to like understand these systems and track them over time. So you know, we're working on a bill around dark patterns. Just how do we reform the design of these systems to be better for users so that they're no longer sort of incentivizing our worst selves and incentivizing our better selves. And then the second thing I want to talk about is just like how we use these systems, our recommendation to track user experiences. So I mentioned that, you know, my experience working on content like bullying and harassment, the metrics that our platform was measuring was not really indicative of the value that it was providing to users. And so we actually had internal dashboards which asked users not, have you seen violating content, but have you felt bullied or harassed? And so this is a screenshot of one of those dashboards. You can see that about 8.7% of people here have felt bullied or harassed in the last 7 days, right? So that's 0.7% of all users feeling bullied and harassed. Which is a very different number than the 0.08% number that you know, the platforms will tell you about, like the amount of bullying harassment content on the platform. If you knew that, and the number's a little higher for kids. So if you knew that 11% of 13 to 15-year-olds had felt bullied or harassed in the last 7 days, I think that's a very different idea of the scale of impact than looking at some of the numbers they give you. So we've been doing these kind of polling internally and try to replicate these you know, tracking user experiences over time. We can only do it with adults because that's the sample we have access to. But you know, we're sort of replicating this idea that some platforms are creating worse experiences for people than others. Twitter, for example, people have a lot of bad experiences with the world on Twitter. It's probably not surprising to people here. But there are places like LinkedIn, you know, which have very different norms, Pinterest, just very different kinds of experiences across different platforms. And not looking just the negative, but also looking at the positive. So where are we actually seeing people have meaningful connections with other people online? And so, you know, people self-reporting that they're having a more meaningful experience on places like FaceTime, text messaging, Facebook. And they're not really connecting with people on Twitter and not even like really learning that much from people on Twitter either, right? A lot of people are learning things on YouTube and they're kind of sort of learning things on Twitter, but less so than say LinkedIn. And we're doing the same thing for AI. So, you know, I asked you guys how many people have used AI here. In our initial polling, about 10% of the population had used ChatGPT and those kinds of tools. Latest round of polling, about 18%. So about, I mean, that might not seem like a lot, but that's like a, you know, an 180% or 80% increase in just a few short months. Not that many people, you know, to Professor Herzfeld's presentation, like there aren't really that many people who are using these things for like social connection, right? It's about 5%. That's 5% of the 18% who have used these things. 5% of them have used them for social connection. So that's not like a thing that's happening today that much. A lot of people are really using it out of curiosity, but yeah, that's still a sizable number of the population of the world, or of the, like in terms of raw numbers, that's still a lot of people. And we need to start tracking those people's experiences to see, are they having uncomfortable experiences? Are they being encouraged to do better or worse things? Most people generally do find these things useful versus harmful. So they are, we're not seeing a ton of like harmful experiences being reported. But again, unlike social media, hopefully we won't be surprised by it if we start measuring these things now versus waiting for these things to happen in the future. So that's what I mostly want to talk about. If I want to, I always like to end with like 2 takeaways, because like who knows how much you're going to remember from my talk. So one, we can and should design AI-powered systems to ensure they're optimized not towards our short-term, that should say revealed preferences, but not towards our short-term revealed preferences, but more towards our long-term ideal preferences, right? Like what do people want? What are our aspirations? And then if we actually succeed in that, we should be able to measure and understand people's experiences over time and see that their experiences both with social media and with AI are getting better and not worse. So that's my talk, and yeah, thanks, appreciate your attention.
Thank you both so much. Really interesting to think about. Both of the talks raised a lot of really interesting questions. And as somebody who's done a lot of work in social psychology, I found myself drawn to questions of social psychology within both of the talks. So maybe I'll just raise a question. I think there's a question that sort of just bubbled up, but it's not quite. So this idea of, do we want to use computers in general or AI as a servant or a partner? So I really appreciated that framing. Like I thought that distilled down some of the questions that I've been asking myself in a way that was sort of a little more graspable. And so I found myself thinking about that, and actually thinking back to the earlier conversation today around how does the use of this AI affect us? Actually, this kind of came up in the conversation afterwards. So this idea is if we're using AI as a servant versus a partner, obviously we're entering into this imagined relationship with AI with different assumptions about what we expect from the interaction, right? And so if we're modeling the interaction with AI on that kind of a mindset, either this is a servant or this is a partner, then there's all kinds of these other thoughts going on in our psychology around that, right? And so if we kind of hold that in suspension for just a second, so there's that observation, right? And then I'm just playing around with that as I'm listening to Ravi's talk, and I had the realization at some point during your talk, oh crap, we're not treating the AI as the servant, we're the servant, right? Like do you see what I mean? Like what you're describing is that so much of the way that the AI behind these algorithms, behind the technology that we interact with, actually sort of flips that, so that we're not making the choices about what we're engaging in, what we're doing, or how we're doing it, for how long we're doing it. And I guess, so there's a lot in there that we can unpack, but I think sort of putting those two things together, I want to raise just this question of somehow the relationship between humans. This question is going on too long, and I apologize for that, but I'm almost there, so just hang with me. Somehow the relationship between humans and technology, it has some sort of like sleight of the hand in our psychology, where the questions that we think we're asking flip, right? And so I guess, so first question is just like, what are your thoughts about the way that psychology underlies these dynamics? How does thinking of AI as a servant or as a partner affect the way we psychologically interact with the rest of the world? And then at the same time, just one more layer onto that is, you observe that only about 5% of people were using it for social connection, right? Popular talk among parents, I have teenagers, is that, oh my gosh, all of our kids are gonna have AI best friends in 10 years, and that's really creepy. And like, I have no idea if that's realistic or not, right? But there is something about this psychological sleight of hand that seems to happen with humans and computers and the interaction therein, where like I have a Fitbit and I'll wake up and see what it says, and if it says something that I don't like, I'll get pissed off at it. Like that's not like that's not me deciding to be in a relationship with the Fitbit, right? Or do you see what I mean? So there's somehow this happens and it sneaks in, and so those are some loose, weird observations, but that I think tap into the two things that you guys are getting to. Any thoughts about that?
I mean, I think it's really important, like, who is the tool AI is servant to, right? So like, in some ways, like for the case of a lot of these online products, the AI is a servant of the company, as opposed to a servant to you, the person, right? And so it's just really important to make that distinction. And the companies, aren't necessarily evil, in my opinion. They want to believe that your interests and their interests are aligned, but it's just not always true. And so I think the more you can show them that, like, look, here are some cases where or we in society need to be like partners in the development of these products, or else they're always going to, in a biased way, believe that, people using my product means they're getting value of the product. And that's just not true. A lot of times people use a product more than they want to. 70% of teens say that they use these products more than they want to. They feel manipulated by these products to use them more than they want to, right? So it's not like we're not telling them that they're using them too much. They're saying, I'm using it too much. Like, help me use it less, right? So just who is the AI a servant to, and how will we optimize? I mean, they're all just optimization functions. They're optimizing for something. So are we programming that optimization function to be aligned with our best interests, what we want, our aspirational desires, or are we programming them to be, optimized for time spent and, how many ads I consume?
My question for you, though, Ravi, is government regulation really the only way to handle this? Because otherwise, what incentive is there for a company like Facebook or YouTube? I mean, they want to make a profit.
Yeah.
They want their advertisers say, we'll pay you more if you put more eyeballs on our ads. So in a capitalist system, what incentive is there for the company to actually want to partner with the user?
Well, I mean, I use the model of building codes intentionally, that like you can still make money on designing great buildings. You just can't sell cheaper materials, right? So I think there's an unfortunate thing where companies all want kids to use their system, where they do things that I don't think they should be doing or want to be doing around like optimizing for short form videos that sort of probably, has way too many scantily clad youngsters dancing around. It's just not, they know it's not healthy to some degree, and they need to not be incentivized to undercut each other. So there's like a minimum standard setting that like needs to happen, I think, but that companies can still make a profit over that minimum standard. But I don't think regulation is the only way. I think that like companies are realizing that in the long term, some of these things are in their longer term best interest. So there's a role in society for us as like shareholders to care less about what happened last quarter and to, be more invested in longer term outcomes. There's we track user experience because we think there's an incentive for advertisers and consumers to just enact their own pressure just by sort of like voting with their wallets for products that they think are better. So I think there's all sorts of ways to do it. I don't think government's the only way.
Yeah. I also think that the 5% number may have two issues with it. And the one is that if that's self-reported, people may not be adequately reporting. And the other is that, of course, if it's dealing like with chatbots, they're pretty new. Yeah. When social media was new, people weren't spending the hours on it that they are today.
Yeah.
And so I would expect that number to grow.
We expect it to grow too. We just want to catch it before it goes.
Yeah.
I think we have an audience question. It's a mic. It doesn't.
Alexa, it's hello. This is David.
Yeah.
Let me put this right there. Noreen brought something up this morning that was very good, and it kind of ties across the panel right here, is we were talking about relationships from the computer and God in that discussion. And then you said, in the absence now where religion is moving outside of society, there is kind of a void. I'm just kind of paraphrasing. I think that was one of your points you're making.
Yes.
And second, I noticed on both your literature and you were at Facebook, 2017-16, we had the election, Cambridge Analytica, where data was taken and put into certain models to achieve a political science purpose, I'll say. And then you mentioned your background in social psychology in terms of kind of that same dynamic. And then this morning we had more of the philosophical, theological between the AI models and the overall philosophical framework. So where I'm kind of expanding on those three dots is what you brought up, Noreen, which is, what is replacing that ideology, because people are moving away from the religious part and there's this void and computers fill it. I'm going to throw this out to the table as more of this Oxford concept that has made the news this past several months, which is about effective altruism, is kind of a Silicon Valley approach. And if you saw the trials that went on, there was people playing God. So I'd just like to throw that on the table for your four views of that to maybe get some thoughts going. Starting with Noreen.
Oh. In what sense do you mean that it was people playing God? Yeah.
So there are people saying we are smarter to make these resource allocations.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what you saw with the court case in terms of that whole issue. So that was what I meant by somebody playing God or making these larger decisions for society under that context. That's what I meant.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure if there's a concern underneath your question that eventually AI will be making those decisions. And then, of course, you have to say, well, the AI isn't really making those decisions. Those decisions are being made through the AI by people. And in that sense, I think it comes back to Scott's talk, in which you say the AI is just a tool again, but it's a tool that, at least in our Western society right now, is given an inordinate amount of authority in people's psyches. They think that if the computer says something, it must be right. And so I think it could be an extremely manipulative tool, just as, in a way, people use statistics. And, who was it who said something like, there are lies, dirty lies and statistics? Like, you can use them and make them manipulate people to think, well, this has to be the best way. This has to be the way we would save the most people, or the way we do the best for society. And it's given an extra level of authority if you have statistics and then you say, oh, and we ran it through an AI program and the AI program said that this was the best way. And all of that puts levels of, or layers of technology between people. And that, I think, is one of the things that Pope Francis has pointed out in his 2 recent statements on AI, that the importance of encounter can get lost when you put layers of technology in between the true encounter of 2 people.
I mean, sort of to dovetail on that, I mean, I think people want meaning in life. I think it's like a human, there's many theories of psychology which have, there are different kinds of happiness. There's like momentary happiness, and then there's like being a part of something bigger than yourself, which is a higher level thing that we all are going to strive for. And there are ways that these systems can give you like a sugary version of that, that isn't the real thing. And people will pay attention to it. And so a lot of times the people who are, the problem of misinformation is not going to go away, in part because people really believe that they are part of a bigger movement to reveal the truth to another group of people. And so they want to be part of a bigger thing, and they've been co-opted by another group of people to, who are sort of playing on that desire for meaning in life. And so, yeah, hopefully, the more we can sort of have these systems optimized for the authentic version of meaning in life, as opposed to the inauthentic version of meaning in life, which is like the thing I will reshare, then hopefully these systems will sort of bend more towards something that approximates true meaning.
Other questions from the audience?
Ravi, I have a question for you. You didn't mention the role that anonymity plays in what goes on social media. I wonder if you could say how that fits into your building code.
I mean, we talk about reputation, but we also, anonymity has a long, important tradition, especially in like authoritarian countries where like people need to be able to feel that, protected. So I think the important thing is that reputation is different than, you can have consequences for your actions, even if you are not known individually as who you are. And so a lot of the people, for example, in American history who used anonymity to say important political things, nobody knew who they were, but they had a reputation, right? Like people still knew that like they were a person who was important, and they had a reputation to lose if they said things that were. So I think there's a way that you can, I think you can divorce the idea of reputation for anonymity, and we would sort of support the idea that people should have reputation, even though you shouldn't necessarily know who a person is.
Mm-hmm.
Learning, where like you mentioned anonymity, what happens if the bias, you track a bias in Facebook? It somehow maps me, pictures and this and that and all that, or a deep fake. How do you get that information taken off without disturbing the model?
I don't know of a solution to that problem. I would say, I mean, people can do like things, Band-Aids on the back, but I personally think that we should have, and it's in our recommendations, we should have laws about the things that can and cannot be put into AI systems. And so to your point earlier, like who owns your face? Like we actually have a recommendation that we should all own our face. Like if somebody wants to put my face on a thing, I should have a say over that. Especially, I mean, you see cases these days of, high school kids putting like other kids in their classes on, non-consensual sexual imagery, which, is awful. Like I can't imagine being a high school kid these days and like having that as like a thing. So I think if we don't have something like, we own our face, like I think really terrible things are going to happen. So, I think that, but I don't know if that's exactly the right answer, but I think it's something in that direction, and we should start figuring out these laws now versus waiting for like terrible things to happen.
So it's hard, they can't implement the right, what you're seeing at Facebook, the right you've got.
It'd be hard. I mean,
the algorithm itself in terms of training data for understanding.
I mean, you could do it. I mean, like it's just that these systems take a long time to train. So like it's hard. It's not like you can just subtract a thing from a thing like that. So I think it's easier to stop a large set of things from being trained in the first place than to subtract one thing afterwards. So.
I think that was Noreen what you're bringing up. The right to be forgotten. So the bias comes in where you can disclose people that want to be anonymous or political activists in certain countries that could be killed. But once you start mapping all the data, just like the New York Times article, it's really hard to control that or constrain it, where suddenly an activist could be killed in a certain country in the world. I think that was your point.
Right. Yeah. Or the doxing that goes on, of people. And you also think, it would be nice in something like Facebook to have more control over our own feed. For example, I have a friend who had a long-term relationship and posted a lot of pictures with his girlfriend, and then when they broke up, Facebook kept saying, "Here's your memory from last year," and he was like, "I don't want to remember," So it would be nice to have ways where you could
Yeah.
say, and please don't remind me of any picture that has so-and-so in it.
There probably is a way, but it's probably like buried under like
It's like
3. You
so
can't figure out how to do
impossible
it.
to do.
I mean,
Yeah.
one good thing about generative AI that people are working with is like making it easier for people to say things like that, right? So if you can just describe in words, like, please don't show me pictures of my ex,
Yeah.
that would actually be a possible thing versus like trying to find the menu option, to figure out like how to, like, I don't know where that
And if you
is.
haven't tagged them in every picture,
Yeah.
it's like,
Yeah.
oh gosh,
Yeah.
Can I ask about what you haven't talked about exactly about creativity? Thank you. New ideas. As a non-expert, underlined, I've been thinking about if we're putting all these and all this information into the machine, and the machine's learning on the basis of that, and then we're teaching it to find ways to create things. I mean, one big question that's comes up is like, what's the relationship between non-AI intelligence, like us, when we're inventing new things, or thinking, like we say, thinking outside of the box, or just a strange idea that might come out of left field but prove fruitful in some way, or some sort of artistic creation. We had a student in the first session who said, as a musician, she was very interested because there's a debate within, she's studying violin at Colburn, between proficiency and prowess sort of technically, whether that's what musicianship is, or is it kind of invention or freedom from the given form that counts. I'd love to hear more from those who know more about, like, what's the state of that question about creativity and intelligence technically? Like, what is it able to do right now? And does that make sense as a place to think about difference between human intelligence, or about sort of like authentic components of relationships too, about creativity or spark or unexpected interactions or twists in a conversation that presumably an algorithm can predict?
That's a challenging question. I'm working right now on a paper that the question underlining the paper is, would an icon that is generated by Midjourney or DALL-E be an icon? And most of my students who are orthodox just immediately on a gut level say no. But you have to ask, why not? To what? Because in a way, the painting of icons is rather formulaic. So you could say, well, it's going to be formulaic. Well, the painting of icons is fairly formulaic. Back in the iconoclastic controversy, it was made clear that the medium did not matter. So you can't go that way either, so you end up saying, well, does it have something to do with the spirituality of the person who created it? And I think typically we've thought of art as a form of communication, as a form of speaking to and hearing the other, that the artist was communicating something from their soul, to the viewer. And I think that's where the objection comes, is they're saying, well, if it's created by a machine, if the machine is soulless. On the other hand, you have to ask, but in postmodern theory, we just say, hey, a work of literature, a work of art is whatever it is to the viewer. So in that case, you could say, well, why can't the viewer look at an icon that was, said, that was generated by an AI and have a spiritual experience? So there's no easy answer, I think, to that question, because it's so multifaceted. There are so many layers to it. I don't know, what the rest do you think?
I'm kind of tempted, if you don't mind, to put Scott on the.
Yeah.
Because I feel like the types of ideas you spoke about this morning are so on point and pertinent to this type of question.
Well, I mean, I think I would try to understand artists
first of all, it's a human interaction, it's a human activity. In the sense that the artist is the person who can see an aspect of reality, or see reality from a certain perspective, and can take that experience and heighten it in some kind of form through a work of art, whether that's painting, or whether that's a poem, using words, or sculpture, or music. And so the artwork is ultimately rooted in the vision of the artist as a way of trying to communicate something about this reality through a certain kind of medium. Obviously, to communicate it, both to kind of capture whatever it is that this person's looking at and trying to understand, but also to capture it for someone else. And so that's, in some ways, a sort of ontological understanding of what the artwork just is. Right? And whether or not that artwork can have an effect on somebody is very important, obviously a different question. So to say, well, the artwork is defined as being an artwork because of the effect it might have on the recipient of that artwork, I think misses the being of the artwork. So something generated by a computer might lead to a certain kind of response, which might be very similar to the response that someone would have from what I would call a true work of art. But the response of the recipient is not what makes it to be what it is. Those two are two different issues, I would say. So I think you have to sort of look at it that way. So I would say, whatever is generated by the AI, in terms of, first of all, it's not generated by the AI, it's generated by the person or the group who made it through the AI. So that's really important, I think.
So is the AI just the medium?
It's just a medium of whoever, whatever group. I'm sure it's a group. It's not just one. I mean, you mentioned it. It seems like it's a massive project from lots of different people, which I've known before, but it's interesting to hear it from someone who's actually involved in it. So this is a group of people who have done this so that a user or someone can do something through the AI. So that's, I think, important. The AI is not generating anything in the full sense of the term. We're generating it through this program. But whatever's generated, I would say, is not art. Maybe it's artful.
Or maybe to use your analogy, it's like it's not creative. I mean, like it looks like creative, right? In the same way that like this looks like a wooden table.
That's a really good.
Yeah, it looks creative, but it's not actually creating a thing because it's actually imitating a bunch of other things that are pushing it out.
So one of the
That's
Well,
what art does.
But I mean, I would say that, and again, I think people are capable of surprising us in a way that the machine is bounded by the things that it has given you to give you a thing that is, and there are ways you can like, okay, I have a machine training against another machine, but it's still bounded by like the universe of things that we've given it. It's a universe of possibility that we've given it. And I would, I would argue that human beings are capable of transcending the boundaries of the things we've given it and doing something else.
So there was actually a study on this, though, that would suggest otherwise. And I have my certain dubiousness about many social scientific research things. So I take this for what you will. But I hope I can remember this with some accuracy. So it was a study done at Wharton. And essentially the question was, can a group of students generate creative marketing ideas, because we're at Wharton, we're at business school, generate creative marketing ideas as well as AI, and then in collaboration with AI, right? And so what they actually found is that the AI was actually able to come up with more unexpected combinations than the students alone, right? And then I can't quite recall. I want to say that I think when they worked together, maybe that was enhancing. But the point being that like actually the recombination effects of the AI were actually pretty extensive. And so this idea that if we use DALL-E or something like that to create a work of art, okay, well, the human is using the tool, right? And in that sense, what is the tool? So you can say there's a tool that's a paintbrush or a tool that is a violin or whatever. Here, the tool is some code written by somebody I don't know, but I've collaborated with that person now, right? And so to say that it isn't creative, I don't know. I look at so much art and I see recombinations of other things that occur in other places put together in different ways, which sounds to me a lot like what comes out of that. So that's kind of, I think, why I had like such a strong, like, oh no, we can,
I mean, these systems are built on, millions of other people's stuff, right? So
Right.
like, is it have more experience than any group of 20 people? Sure. Like,
Yeah.
can it generate more things than a group of 20 people?
Yeah.
But can it generate something outside of like the million things it's already seen? Which is, I guess, how I'm defining creative. Can it extrapolate something outside of the experience you've already given it?
But I think, and then what I would just say, and then I'll stop, is just that it would recombine things that it's already seen, which I think is mostly what human artists do. Like, do human artists, what? Oh, right. Well, we've seen through it. Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I think David has a question.
What I'm most concerned about is not, I mean, first of all, I think proponents of AI would say any artist is trained. They're trained by being exposed to lots of different kinds of art. And then something happens in their brain where they recombine the sum of their experience, which is all that they have, and they create something based on that input, they would say. And so I'm not sure about that, whether we sort of say, well, it's a larger sample size or there's no, I don't know about that. I think there has been a tendency where we think about human uniqueness as human creativity. Human creativity adds some, and then I can't help but saying again, some sort of spark or some other sort of novelty element. But isn't that precisely what this crisis is that we're thinking through? That we're saying, well, it is an awful lot like the proponents of AI would say, aesthetic training is indeed acquiring a model. There's inputs that go in, and then it becomes a more sophisticated, a more broader inputs, a more ability to produce higher quantities over a lifetime. But it can be described as a kind of model training, and so that's now that we've defined it that as such, that's what we're being outstripped in.
There's a Zoom audience question that I think kind of tacks on well to this. And it's kind of a trope among icon painters that you can't just paint an icon. There's a lot of prayer involved in that.
Yes.
So I suppose that kind of goes directly to the whole thing about what is it different between just training it on a model versus doing it yourself, even though humans undergo roughly analogous process, is that it seems at each moment of recombining the previously existing precedents, because of the connection with the transcendent, whatever you want to call it, there's like a unique combination at each moment that, I don't know, even if it's roughly the same thing, it's never the exact same thing that you do. And I don't know how much of the prayer element comes into this, especially now that I think there is some turn in logical anthropology about the whole homo orans thing, as well as the homo in communion as well.
I think that person put their finger on something that is very important. And that is that for the person when a person paints an icon, if they're doing it correctly in the tradition, they are establishing through prayer some connection with the icon. And that what ends up in the artwork is not a real likeness, like a photograph of the saint, that actually the likeness that's on there is not necessarily a good likeness of the saint, but that it in some way captures something of that person's spirit in a way that allows the icon then to act as a window for others to be in contact with that saint.
Just one quick thing. I find this pretty consistently when there are these kinds of proponents for, let's say, blurring the lines between human creativity or activity and then artificially generated creativity or activity. I mean, it's almost, you see the formal structure is almost always the same, which is to give a kind of deflated, reductive view of human activity, human intelligence, human thinking, human creativity, artwork, whatever. So you give a very reductive, deflated view of that, and then you give a very inflated, exalted description of what it is that the computer or the machine is supposed to be doing. I think only by doing that move, by giving a reductive view of the human and an overly exalted, inflated view of the machine, only then can you start to sort of raise these issues. Well, you know, we're not sure about the real difference, but I think if you just attend to the way these things disclose themselves, you see they're just different. Talk to artists and see they're not just combining images that they, yeah, of course they've been trained, of course they've seen these things worked out by others before, but there is some, I mean, if in philosophy you call it intuition, creativity, whatever, there's something there which is an activity of a spiritual soul in a body, right? So I think that move is almost always made as a precursor for sort of raising the quote unquote problem of the indistinguishability between the human and the AI activities.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing, right? Because you see a lot in free will, like people like, human, you say this in your book, like, computers cannot decide to do something other than what they are programmed to do. And you're so like, I on the other hand can decide, and they're like, no, you can't. You actually don't have free will. You're completely programmed. I'm like, okay, you're not arguing that computers are alive. You're arguing that I'm not. Is kind of I think what you're saying. You're not. I don't feel like you're actually. You're kind of reducing human capacity as opposed to like actually arguing for the thing that you think is.
And to paraphrase Jaron Lanier, he said, if the Turing test gets passed, it's not going to be because the machines became more human-like, but because we humans became more machine-like. And that is something where, I showed that picture of the two little robots with the children. And that is something that I worry about deeply in using robots as caregivers for children, is the children are in a stage where they are learning from their environment. And so they are learning from the people that they are around, and children mimic what is in their environment. So if they're spending a chunk of time with a machine, that means they're not spending that chunk of time with another human. Will they learn to become more machine-like?
Well, on that uplifting note, we are at time. This has been so wonderful to hear from your ideas and hear about your work today. And Ravi, thank you so much for your comments and your contributions. And everybody, thank you for participating and joining us.